It began like so many hearings before it: long tables, stacks of papers, the echo of shuffling shoes on marble floors. The room was tense, the kind of tension that isn't loud but heavy, like a storm crouching just beyond the windows. Reporters leaned forward with pens ready, cameras fixed, knowing that whenever Ted Cruz sat across from a Democrat, sparks tended to fly, and then it started. The first interruption was sharp, almost casual. Cruz leaned in, cut across Jasmine Crockett mid-sentence, his voice booming just enough to remind the room who loved to command the spotlight. Some chuckled nervously, others rolled their eyes. Crockett paused, unshaken, before continuing. The second interruption landed harder. His words spilled over hers like a man desperate to drown out what he could not control. This time, heads turned. A staffer stifled a laugh. Crockett's eyes narrowed for only a moment before she pressed on, her voice steady, her rhythm unbroken. By the third, the interruptions felt less like questions and more like strategy. Cruz wasn't debating. He was steamrolling, daring her to stumble. The fourth made the audience shift in their seats. The fifth drew murmurs, side eyes. The type of discomfort that spreads through a chamber when arrogance grows louder than reason. By the sixth, the entire room felt it. Each time she opened her mouth, there he was, cutting, pressing, trying to overwhelm. And yet, Crockett's poise never cracked. Her calm composure was more deafening than his volume. Her silence between his interruptions carrying more weight than his attempts to dominate. The count hung in the air like a drumbeat. 1, 2, 3, 6. And with each strike, the audience leaned further in, not just watching a hearing, but witnessing a clash of character: entitlement versus dignity, arrogance versus patience. But then, the atmosphere shifted. The chamber seemed to hold its breath, because everyone sensed it, even Cruz himself, that the seventh interruption would not be like the others. Something was building, something no amount of volume could suppress. And when it came, it didn't just stop him. It shattered the rhythm he had built, silenced the arrogance he had worn like armor, and turned the entire room on its head. But it was the seventh interruption that no one saw coming, and it would change everything. The hearing itself should have been routine, another day in Washington. Another committee meeting filled with policy details that rarely break through the noise of the nightly news. The subject on the table was serious: accountability, oversight. The kind of business that touches the lives of ordinary Americans, but too often gets buried beneath partisan spectacle. For those seated in the chamber, it was another chapter in the long grind of government. But for millions beyond those walls, what unfolded here would soon become a symbol of something far larger. Because when Ted Cruz entered the room, tone shifted immediately. He wasn't there to quietly examine facts or probe for solutions. Cruz, known for his flair for confrontation, came ready to perform. His reputation preceded him: the grandstanding speeches, the smug interruptions, the tendency to dominate hearings less to uncover truth than to score viral clips for himself. His presence signaled that whatever conversation was planned would be anything but ordinary. And across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, newer to the national stage, still carving her place, but already recognized for a fire that couldn't be muted. She didn't shrink from a fight, nor did she posture for attention. Crockett's style was different, grounded, patient, the calm of a lawyer who had spent years staring down intimidation in courtrooms. To those who underestimated her, she appeared too composed, too measured. But those who knew her story understood beneath that calm rested steel. The clash between them was inevitable. Cruz, a veteran of bombast, circling like a hawk. Crockett, the freshman firebrand, seated firmly, refusing to flinch. It wasn't simply Republican versus Democrat. It was arrogance versus resilience. And as Cruz began his interruptions, the stakes became clear. This wasn't about policy points anymore. It wasn't about lines in a report or citations in a brief. It was about voice. Who gets to speak? Who gets to be heard? For Cruz, interruption was a tactic of erasure, a way to remind the room that his voice was louder, older, more entitled. For Crockett, every pause, every patient breath before she resumed, was a declaration that she would not be erased. The weight of the moment grew with each exchange. Lawmakers shifted uncomfortably, knowing the line between tough questioning and outright bullying had been crossed. Reporters scribbled faster, realizing they might have a headline on their hands. And still, Crockett endured. Each word she managed to press through his interruptions, adding to the tension. Like a violin string stretched tighter and tighter. By the sixth interruption, it no longer felt like a hearing at all. It felt like theater and unscripted drama in which character was being tested before a live audience. And in that theater, the roles had crystallized. Cruz, the heavy-handed antagonist, too consumed with his own voice to realize he was writing his own downfall. Crockett, the calm yet unyielding figure, waiting for the precise moment when patience would become power. The chamber was silent between his interjections, as though everyone was waiting, knowing instinctively that something bigger than politics was unfolding, a generational clash, a cultural clash, a battle of respect versus entitlement. And when the count of interruptions reached 6, the tension reached its breaking point. Every pen hovered, every camera tightened its frame, every witness leaned in. Because the room didn't realize it yet, but they were no longer watching a simple hearing. They were watching the birth of a viral legend. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to understand Ted Cruz. He has long been a fixture in the halls of power, a man whose name carries equal parts recognition and ridicule. To his supporters, he is the sharp-tongued Texan who takes no prisoners, a conservative warrior who relishes every confrontation. To his critics, he is the embodiment of bluster brilliant at theater, hollow on substance, a politician more interested in the spotlight than in the grind of real governance. From the earliest days of his career, Cruz cultivated a reputation for dominance in debate. At Princeton, then at Harvard Law, his sharp memory and cutting delivery earned him both admiration and resentment. Professors noted his intellect. Classmates remembered his arrogance. The through line was always the same. Ted Cruz loved the fight, but he loved winning the moment even more. It wasn't enough to argue. He had too overwhelmed, too bulldozed to leave the other side rattled and diminished. That pattern followed him into Washington. On the Senate floor, in hearings, and especially in televised appearances, Cruz deployed interruption not just as a tactic, but as a signature. He wielded his voice like a gavel, striking down whoever dared to finish a sentence in his presence. For Cruz, speaking over others wasn't rude. It was strategy. It conveyed power, suggested superiority, created the illusion that his control of the room equated to control of the truth, but history has shown the cracks in that armor. His grandstanding often backfired. Who could forget the 2013 government shutdown, engineered in large part by Cruz's obstinacy? The spectacle left the nation frustrated, his own party leaders exasperated, and his approval rating sinking. Or the infamous flight to Cancun during a deadly Texas freeze when constituents shivered in the dark while Cruz basked under foreign sun. The images went viral not because they surprised people, but because they confirmed what so many already believed, that Cruz's instincts bent towards self-interest and theater over service. Then there were the countless viral moments his clashes with witnesses in hearings where he tried to play the role of prosecuting attorney, only to be met with fact checks that cut him down. His condescending tone toward female colleagues, his smirks, his barbed one-liners, his habit of filling the air with words until reason suffocated. Each one contributed to an image less of a principled senator than of a man addicted to performance. It is this addiction that made his interruptions of Jasmine Crockett so predictable, almost scripted. To Cruz, cutting her off 6 times was a show of strength, a reminder to the chamber that his voice could dominate, that his years of seniority made him the unchallenged presence. But what he failed to see, what arrogance blinded him to, was that every interruption was being tallied. Not just by Crockett, but by the room, by the cameras, by the millions who would soon be watching online, because interruptions can project dominance in the moment. But over time, they project something else: insecurity. The refusal to let another voice be heard reveals not confidence but fear of being bested. It reveals the brittleness of ego that cannot withstand challenge. For Cruz, each cut-in, Each booming line was meant to smother Crockett's rising presence. Instead, it built a countdown, a rhythm that only heightened anticipation for the moment she would strike back. This was not the first time. Arrogance disguised fragility. Cruz's public persona often wavered under pressure. He could spar endlessly when in control of the mic. But when cornered, weathered by a journalist's pointed question, a colleague's sharp retort, or even Donald Trump's personal humiliations during the 2016 primaries, his bluster turned awkward, his comebacks hollow. He swallowed insults he could not answer, proving that his interruptions thrived only when directed downward, not upward. His dominance was selective, his bravery conditional. That was the Cruz who sat in the chamber opposite Jasmine Crockett, a man rehearsed in bullying but brittle under true challenge. A man convinced that talking over someone equated to defeating them. And yet, like so many before him, he mistook arrogance for strength, noise for power, and interruptions for victory. But arrogance always writes its own downfall. And Cruz, with every interruption he lobbed, was unknowingly scripting the very moment that would flip the room. Against him and elevate Jasmine Crockett into the viral spotlight to truly grasp why. Jasmine Crockett refused to bend. Under Ted Cruz's relentless interruptions, you have to step back into the story that shaped her. Crockett's path was not paved with privilege or ease. It was carved from grit, sharpened by struggle, and polished by a refusal to let silence be forced upon her before she ever took a congressional seat. Crockett was a lawyer, a defender, an advocate, and often the lone voice, standing beside people who felt the system had written them off. She didn't choose the easy cases, the ones that made headlines or padded bank accounts. She chose the hard ones. The cases of the marginalized, the voiceless, the people who were told their stories didn't matter. And every time she stood in a courtroom, she carried with her not just legal briefs but the weight of dignity itself. She learned quickly that dignity is not given, is taken, defended, fought for word by word. In those courtrooms, surrounded by opposing counsel with deeper pockets and louder reputations, Crockett cultivated her patience. She realized that interruption was a weapon. Opposing attorneys would cut her off, talk over her, try to fluster her into mistakes. But instead of collapsing under the pressure, she grew sharper. Her voice became her anchor. Her calm composure became her armor. Every pause she held, every unbroken gaze was a statement. You will not erase me. This wasn't just about her. Crockett carried the lessons of her upbringing into every battle. Growing up, she saw the ways power spoke over those without it. She saw how race, gender, and class often determined who was allowed to finish a sentence, and who was dismissed before the second word left their lips. She understood that the fight for fairness wasn't abstract. It was personal. It was survival. That's what drew her into activism. Long before the cameras, she was in the trenches, marching, organizing, standing shoulder to shoulder with communities that demanded to be heard. She wasn't the politician who dipped in for a photo op. She was the organizer who stayed long after the cameras left, cleaning up, strategizing, planning for the next fight. Her reputation grew not from theatrics, but from consistency. People knew she would show up. People knew she would listen. By the time Crockett entered Congress, she wasn't a blank slate. She was already battle-tested. She had already stood against louder, richer, older men who thought they could bulldoze her voice. Each one had taught her the same lesson. Composure is not weakness. It is power. And when wielded correctly, it can dismantle arrogance more effectively than a raised voice ever could. Still, Congress presented its own kind of challenge. The chamber was not a courtroom, and Cruz was not an ordinary opposing attorney. The stakes were larger, the audience wider, the consequences heavier. Yet Crockett approached her role the same way she had approached every fight before, with dignity as her compass, fairness as her guide. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She only needed to stand firm. Her colleagues soon recognized her fire. She spoke with clarity, cut through obfuscation, and reminded the public that truth could be delivered without theatrics. But what endeared her most was her refusal to abandon empathy. Even as she sparred with opponents, her arguments returned to people, the the families without health care, the workers without protections, the communities too often dismissed. She was never arguing for argument's sake. She was arguing because silence was not an option. And so, when Cruz set his sights on her during that hearing, he wasn't facing a rookie scrambling for footing. He was facing a woman forged in the crucible of courtrooms and community struggles, a representative who had already mastered the art of patience under pressure. Each interruption he threw at her was, in truth, an echo of what she had endured for years. She had been here before, different rooms, different faces, but the same arrogance. The same attempt to drown her out. Only this time, the cameras were rolling. The audience was vast. The stakes were not just legal, but cultural, symbolic. Crockett's calm in the face of 6 interruptions wasn't accidental. It was the culmination of years spent refusing to yield her dignity to men who mistook volume for victory. And as she sat there, poised, unbroken, the chamber buzzing with anticipation, it was clear Crockett wasn't simply defending her right to speak. She was embodying every person who had ever been silenced, interrupted, dismissed. She was carrying the weight of those who knew what it felt like to be cut off before the truth could be spoken. That courtroom grit, the patience, the poise, the razor-sharp timing was about to collide with Cruz's interruptions. And when it did, the result would not just be a takedown. It would be a moment that reminded America why dignity, once unleashed, cannot be denied. The first interruption landed like the opening jab of a prize fight. Jasmine Crockett had barely set her rhythm, laying out her point with measured clarity, when Cruz leaned in and sliced across her words. His tone was casual, dismissive, the kind of interruption meant to signal dominance before the debate even began. A few in the chamber shifted, not yet alarmed but already sensing the imbalance. Crockett paused only a second, then continued, her voice steady, as if swatting away an insect that had buzzed too close. The second came sharper. Cruz raised his voice just enough to roll over hers, like a wave breaking over a calm shore. The intent was clear. He wasn't here to listen. He was here to command. This time, more eyes turned. Staffers glanced up from their notes. Reporters scribbled faster. Crockett inhaled, straightened, and resumed as though the interruption had never happened. Her composure was striking, her refusal to flinch a quiet defiance. By the third, the room knew this wasn't chance. It was a tactic. Cruz was pressing harder now, his words layered with impatience, his interruptions stretching longer, almost daring her to push back. The chamber's air thickened. Like an arena where the crowd begins to sense the fight isn't just verbal, it's about dominance itself. Crockett, though, didn't give him the satisfaction of rattling. She let the silence hang after he cut her off, her eyes locked, her voice steady when she resumed. If his goal was to fluster, it was failing. The fourth interruption arrived like a swing that missed its target. Louder, harsher, more insistent. Cruz's body leaned forward, his voice charging through Crockett's like a hammer. And yet something unexpected happened. People began to react. Murmurs rippled through the room. The arrogance was showing, the imbalance undeniable. Crockett, without raising her voice, countered not with anger but with control. Each word she delivered after his intrusion felt sharper, more deliberate. By the fifth, the interruptions had lost any veneer of legitimacy. This wasn't questioning. This was heckling in a suit. Cruz's sentences sprawled over hers, his tone tinged with frustration, almost desperation. And here the contrast reached its peak. Cruz's voice was frantic. Crockett's was calm. He was the brawler, throwing haymakers. She, the disciplined fighter, conserving energy. Letting the crowd see who was truly in control. The unease in the chamber grew louder than his voice. Lawmakers exchanged looks, the tension now thick enough to taste. Then came the sixth. Cruz pounced the moment she began, not even waiting for her to build momentum. His interruption was harsher, his words rushed as if speed alone could overwhelm. But something shifted in the room. The murmurs weren't just murmurs anymore. They were bristles. Audible disapproval, the shared recognition that this was no longer debate, but bullying. Crockett's silence in that instant carried more weight than anything said. She let the pause linger, her eyes locked on him, her patience becoming a weapon sharper than any rebuttal. It was no longer simply a hearing. It was spectacle. A countdown no one had planned, but everyone now felt. 1, 2, 3, 6. Cruz the aggressor, circling desperately. Crockett, the calm center, absorbing, waiting, biding her time. By the 6th, the chamber bristled. And then came the 7th. The 7th interruption came like a storm cloud breaking. Cruz lunged in again, his words sharp, hurried, layered with the entitlement of a man who had always assumed the floor belonged to him. His tone rose just enough to blot out hers, his body leaning forward, the rhythm of his voice pounding like fists on a table. It was supposed to silence her, to overwhelm her. Instead, it opened the door for a moment that would echo far beyond the chamber. Jasmine Crockett stopped speaking. Not because he had cut her off, but because she allowed him to hang himself with his own words. She folded her hands calmly, her gaze fixed on him with an expression that blended patience and quiet incredulity. She let him finish. And then after the kind of pause that makes every neck crane forward, she struck, "Senator Cruz," she began. Her voice even unhurried, yet edged with iron, the calm before the thunder. "If you would stop interrupting for long enough to hear what I'm actually saying, you might realize this isn't about you." The room shifted. Some stifled laughter. A few gasps broke through. The remark wasn't shouted. It wasn't theatrical. It was scalpel sharp, a direct incision into Cruz's arrogance. And in that instant, the fight flipped. Cruz blinked, his confidence momentarily punctured. He tried to smirk, to shake it off, but Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, but with the confidence of someone who knew the entire chamber and soon, the entire country was watching. "You've interrupted me 6 times already," she continued. Her voice still calm, her cadence deliberate, "and every single time you've proven one thing. You're not afraid of my words. You're afraid of me finishing them." The chamber erupted. A few muffled laughs turned into audible chuckles. One staffer covered their mouth to hide a grin. A camera clicked in rapid succession. Cruz's face flushed just enough to betray the hit. His attempt at dominance had been reframed, dismantled, turned into evidence of his insecurity. And Crockett didn't stop there. She let the room settle for a beat, her silence strategic. And then she delivered the blow with a wry smile. "If interruptions were arguments, Senator, you'd have won hours ago. Unfortunately for you, they're not." This time, the reaction was impossible to contain. Laughter rippled through the chamber, not raucous but undeniable. Heads turned toward Cruz, side eyes flashing, eyebrows raised in a collective silent question. "Did you hear that?" Cruz shifted in his seat, his bluster suddenly muted. He opened his mouth as if to counter, then shut it again, realizing that any attempt to regain footing would only extend his humiliation. For a man who thrived on control, the loss of it was visible, written across his expression. His interruptions, once designed to project strength, now made him look desperate, rattled, small. Crockett had flipped the script with surgical precision. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't resorted to anger. She had let Cruz's arrogance build the case against him and then dismantled it in 3 sentences that struck harder than any monologue. Each word landed like a measured blow in a boxing match, patient jabs, followed by a clean, decisive knockout. The silence after her final line lingered, heavy and electric. Cruz looked down at his notes, then back at her, then around the room, as if searching for an ally. None came. Even some of his own colleagues avoided his gaze, unwilling to share in the embarrassment. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing they had their headline. Staffers whispered in the back, phones already buzzing in their pockets. And through it all, Crockett sat poised, her expression serene, her demeanor unchanged, as though she had simply stated a fact and moved on. But everyone in the chamber knew what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a retort, it was a turning point. For Cruz, it was a rare unraveling. The man who built his reputation on steamrolling opponents had been stopped cold not by someone raising their voice louder, but by someone refusing to play his game. His interruptions, once his weapon, had become his undoing. And as the weight of that reality sank in, his shoulders stiffened, his eyes darted. His composure cracked just enough for cameras to capture. For Crockett, it was vindication. Every struggle she had faced in courtrooms, every time she had been talked over or dismissed, every patient pause she had learned to hold a love, it culminated in this moment. Her restraint, her refusal to take the bait, had paid off. She had turned his arrogance into her platform, his noise into her clarity, his seventh interruption into her defining mic dash drop, and for the audience, those in the chamber and those who would soon watch on screens, the effect was immediate. They didn't just hear a line, they felt it. It carried the satisfaction of justice served in real time, of dignity triumphing over arrogance. It was the kind of moment that cuts through cynicism, that reminds people why composure is sometimes the sharpest weapon of all. The tension in the chamber, once taut and uneasy, broke into something else entirely, the hum of disbelief, of restrained amusement, of history tilting in real time. Cruz's silence became the story, his flustered smirk the punchline. And Crockett, without breaking a sweat, had shifted from target to victor. She leaned back slightly, her words hanging in the air like a banner. Cruz shuffled his papers. Cameras flashed. And in that quiet, in that power reversal, the next chapter of the story began to write itself not in the chamber, but online. Because within hours, the clips would be cut. The subtitles added, the hashtags minted. Crockett's words would travel faster than Cruz could recover, spreading across feeds and timelines. Lighting up screens with the same energy that had just filled the room, the internet would explode within hours. The moment the gavel struck to close the hearing, the battle in the chamber was already spilling onto screens. Phones buzzed with notifications, staffers whispered hurriedly into headsets, and within minutes, clips of the confrontation were cut, subtitled, and uploaded. By the time the first reporters filed their headlines, social media had already crowned its victor. Twitter now called X lit up like a wildfire. Hashtags sprang up with lightning speed. Hashtag Crockett clap back. Hashtag 7 times Ted. Hashtag mic drop moment. Each one surged, propelled by retweets, likes, and commentary from users who couldn't resist replaying the decisive moment. The clip of Crockett's poised takedown looped endlessly, shared by celebrities, activists, and even ordinary folks who rarely waded into politics. "This is how you handle a bully," one post declared, racking up 500,000 likes in a single afternoon. Memes followed. Cruz's flushed face was frozen, captioned with lines like, "When you realize interruptions aren't arguments or 6 times too many, Ted." Others took Crockett's words and overlaid them onto iconic movie scenes, her calm retort replacing the triumphant dialogue of courtroom dramas and underdog films. TikTok edits spliced her voice with music drops, turning her measured response into the soundtrack for a new kind of anthem. Cable news, never one to ignore a viral moment, jumped in. Commentators replayed the clip again and again, each time dissecting it from a different angle. One panel praised Crockett's composure. She didn't just win the exchange, she redefined it. Another marveled at the optics. Cruz came off rattled, while Crockett came off like the adult in the room, even conservative pundits trying to spin the incident struggled to dismiss the viral power of the moment. But it wasn't just pundits and politicians. It was teachers in break rooms, delivery drivers on lunch breaks, grandparents, forwarding clips in family group chats. It was people who had long felt ignored or dismissed, suddenly seeing someone refuse to be talked over and emerging victorious. The dignity of Crockett's delivery contrasted sharply with the arrogance of Cruz's blustered. That contrast resonated. Ordinary viewers, exhausted by constant shouting in politics, found themselves cheering for the calm, surgical rebuttal that cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. The praise came pouring in. Comments described her as fearless, brilliant, refreshing. "Finally, someone who doesn't let him steamroll the room," one user wrote. Another added, "This is why representation matters." She wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for all of us who've been interrupted, ignored, dismissed. The resonance was personal, intimate, and collective all at once. Meanwhile, Cruz became the punchline. Late-night comedians replayed his interruptions with laugh tracks, editing them into skits that made him look like a malfunctioning record stuck on repeat. Political cartoonists sketched him drowning in word bubbles while Crockett calmly rode past. Even some of his allies in the Senate avoided defending him, quietly acknowledging the optics were disastrous. Crockett, on the other hand, leaned into the moment with grace. She didn't gloat, didn't overplay her hand. When reporters asked about the exchange, she simply smiled and said, "I just wanted to be heard." That humility only amplified the impact. Her restraint became part of the story. She wasn't seeking a viral clip, it found her because she stood her ground. The cultural weight of the moment deepened as voices from beyond politics chimed in. Civil rights leaders praised her for embodying dignity under fire. Women's organizations circulated the clip as a masterclass in confronting sexism without losing composure. Immigrant communities shared it as a symbol of standing tall against those who wield power through intimidation. Each group saw themselves reflected in her stance, and beneath the memes, the trending hashtags, the roaring applause, a quieter current ran. This wasn't just about one exchange and one hearing. It was about something larger. It was about the hunger for leaders who refused to be silenced, about the collective thrill of watching arrogance stumble and respect rise. The internet had exploded with laughter, cheers, and endless replays. But beyond the memes, something deeper was happening. When the noise of the viral storm began to fade into something steadier, Jasmine Crockett's response lingered. It wasn't the sharpness of her words alone that people remembered, but the way she carried them, with a grace that made arrogance look small, with a steadiness that made interruption look desperate. In a chamber where voices are so often raised just to be heard, she proved that dignity has its own kind of volume. Crockett understood, perhaps better than most, that this was never just about her. A hearing is a stage, yes, but it's also a mirror. Millions of Americans, teachers, nurses, mothers, immigrants, young professionals saw themselves in that moment of interruption. They felt the sting of being talked over, of having someone assume their words didn't matter, and they saw, in Crockett's calm rebuttal, the possibility of a different ending, because in politics, as in life, arrogance can be loud, but it burns quickly. It consumes oxygen without offering warmth. Dignity, by contrast, endures. It doesn't shout. It steadies. It builds. Crockett showed that power doesn't always belong to the one who interrupts the most. It belongs to the one who refuses to be. Silenced, her composure turned the tables. Instead of being rattled, she radiated control. Instead of trading insult for insult, she answered with clarity. Instead of folding under pressure, she revealed what true strength looks like. Not dominance, but resilience. And in doing so, she reframed the exchange from a petty clash into a universal lesson about what leadership ought to be. The message spread beyond the hashtags, beyond the memes. It sank in, because it carried truth, that in a democracy, every voice deserves space. That respect is not a courtesy, but a right. That truth can shine even in the noisiest rooms if someone is willing to hold steady long enough. Crockett, by standing her ground, defended not just her own words, but the principle that no one should be drowned out simply for speaking them. It was a reminder that politics isn't just policies and procedures. It's human dignity on display. It's the choice between building each other up or tearing each other down. And Crockett's choice to remain composed, to respond with both intellect and heart, made that contrast impossible to ignore. The crescendo, for a moment, carried something rare. Hope. Hope that dignity can still win. Hope that truth, even if interrupted 6 times in a row, will find its way to the surface on the 7th. Hope that a single act of composure can ripple outward, inspiring millions to believe their voices matter. 2. And that's what turned her mic drop into something greater than a viral clip. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just defending herself. She was defending all of us all who have been sidelined, silenced, underestimated. She proved that patience isn't weakness, that respect is a form of strength, and that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the one history remembers. The chamber would empty. The cameras would move on. The pundits would chase the next story. But the lesson endured. Arrogance fades. Dignity remains. And Crockett's calm defiance stood as proof that in the end, it is composure, not bluster, that carries the day. 7 times Ted Cruz tried to take control. 6 times he cut across, louder, sharper, desperate to dominate. But it was the 7th time, the one he thought would seal his authority, that instead sealed his humiliation. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just answer. She transformed the moment. That's the story we've traced tonight. A veteran of bluster undone by his own arrogance. And a freshman representative who showed that calm dignity can pierce through noise sharper than any insult ever could. It's not just politics. It's a lesson in Americanness, in justice, in the idea that every voice deserves respect. In that room, the balance of power shifted. Not because Crockett shouted louder, but because she didn't need to. She proved that real strength doesn't come from interrupting. It comes from enduring. From standing your ground, from knowing that truth doesn't tremble when arrogance roars. And that's the kind of clarity this country is hungry for. If this moment resonated with you, if you saw yourself in Crockett's calm defiance, don't let it stop here. Share this story. Subscribe so you never miss the next chapter in this struggle between arrogance and dignity. Add your voice to the millions who believe composure can still triumph over chaos, that justice still matters, and that our democracy is stronger when every voice gets heard. Because history isn't written by those who interrupt. It's written by those who endure, who hold steady, who remind us that respect is not a luxury, it's a birthright. And that's why one calm voice can silence 6 interruptions and shatter a 7th.